Today we're reading 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and Paul is still defending himself against the false teachers from the last couple of chapters, and now he's going to get a little bit more specific, and this is a really interesting chapter. Verse 2, it says this: I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago, and whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know, only God knows. Now, I highlighted this because I want to make sure that you understand that there are not three heavens. Some cults teach that there are based on this passage, but that's not at all what Paul means. Back in his day, they considered heaven the third heaven. They considered the sky the first heaven, and they considered outer space the second heaven. So that's what he means by that right there. Let's scroll down a little bit further. He says in verse 7, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God, so to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from being proud. You know, after he had this great revelation and he felt like he was really spoken to by God. Now, it's interesting because we don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. He never says what it was. Some people think that maybe it was blindness. Maybe it was some sort of ache or pain that he had. I mean, maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it was some sort of an illness. We don't know, and I think it's great that we don't know because many Christians can relate to this, that maybe God has given us a thorn in the flesh to keep us grounded and to keep us from becoming proud or haughty. So I think that's great. He says this in verse 8, 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away, and each time, here's what he said: my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So then he says this, Paul, so now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. And that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses, like his thorn in the flesh, and in the insults, and the hardships, and the persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong through Christ. What a great section that is right there. As we scroll down, Paul's going to just talk about his love and concern for the church there in Corinth. And we'll just read this here at the bottom. He says in verse 20, for I'm afraid that when I come, I won't like what I find, and you won't like my response. I'm afraid that I will find quarreling, jealousy, anger, selfishness, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorderly behavior. Yes, I'm afraid that when I come again, God will humble me in your presence, and I will be grieved because many of you have not given up your old sins. This should remind you of Truth 2 and Foundations, that once we put our faith in Christ, we should live a different way. We should live in a way that honors God. And apparently the Corinthian church, part of the problem, and maybe your church is like this, maybe your own life is like this, they weren't really living in a way that matched up with what they professed to believe. And so he says, I hope that you will give up your old sins. But he says, but you've not repented of your impurity, your sexual immorality, and eagerness for lustful pleasure. So it's on that kind of a sad, somber note that Paul ends this chapter. But you're ready now to read chapter 12, and we'll see you tomorrow for the last chapter in 2 Corinthians chapter 13.